You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. And now for a brand new show we hope you'll like. Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 65, A Crisis Named Wavelin. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Gene-ology, we hop onto passing episodes of Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing, looking for signs of the morals, meanings, and messages that were part of the stew of his most famous creation, Star Trek.
This week, you are cordially invited to witness A Crisis Named Wavelin, Gene's final script for Wrangler.
Please RSVP by the end of the show and let us know if your plus one is Sam the Horse.
Before we get to trivia on this week's episode, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon or follow us on YouTube or leave a review wherever you're listening to us. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show, which you really, really want, y'all. I'm not even kidding. And our private Discord where you can interact with us, me and Earl, your hosts, during scheduled live chats, along with occasional screenings. You can access all of this for a mere $1 a month. So head on over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation. By the way, folks, reviews really help our show way more than you could possibly imagine. Even if you can't come up with the words for a written review, a 5-star rating really goes a long way to tell the algorithm that you really like us, you think we're the best, and that other people might think we're the best too. So we're counting on all of our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word. Please and thank you. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, are you ready to tell the folks what they've won this week?
They have won a mountain of trivia because I found something wonderful.
I can't wait to hear about it, brother.
An article posted on the website eyesofageneration.com in November 2013 sheds some further light on how Wrangler came to be. The article, which includes an actual behind-the-scenes photo of Wrangler location shooting from 1960, includes the following contribution from Joel Tater, a former director at KTLA-TV, which was NBC's Los Angeles affiliate at the time Wrangler was made and broadcast. And I quote, "KTLA was the last station in the Los Angeles area to get videotape machines because most of their shows were live and they really didn't see the immediate need. When a new general manager, Jim Schulk, took over in 1959, he bought lots of Ampex videotape machines, the new black and white Marconi Mark IV cameras, and built one of the first videotape mobile units which could shoot shows on location. The new mobile unit would be for not only KTLA shows, but anybody else who wanted to shoot their shows on tape on location. Stage 6 on the lot was outfitted with state-of-the-art audio and video equipment to allow for facilities work for outside producers as well. In early 1960, Ford Motor Company was looking to sponsor a summer replacement show for the Ernie Ford Show. Somehow, Schulk convinced NBC and Ford to produce a Western on videotape, something never before attempted. It was called Wrangler and starred Jason Evers. Most of the show would be shot on location at the Jans Ranch in Thousand Oaks, with interiors shot on Stage 6. Now, of course, because Gene allowed Wrangler to fade into the forgotten past of never-rerun television, there is no mention here of the Roddenberry connection because someone who was on the technical side of things probably would not have had any knowledge of that. Anyway, Joel Tater's reminiscences continue. There were many of the usual problems involved in shooting a period piece on location, such as airplane noise, weather, and lighting, but the biggest problem was that videotape editing had not evolved beyond cutting the tape with a razor, piecing it back with cellophane tape, and hoping the splices held. Since there is no visual image on the tape as there is on film, it was a hit-and-miss proposition that you had making an accurate cut. If the tape pulses were not aligned properly, the picture would roll vertically on the air, and you would have to try making the edit again. The first episode of Wrangler went on the air August 4th, 1960. Because of all the editing problems, that first episode was delivered to NBC to play to the full network just hours before airtime. Meanwhile, the KTLA overtime for shooting and editing the show skyrocketed. Unfortunately, the directors chosen for Wrangler had never worked with tape before, causing endless retakes, and the outdoor and indoor scenes rarely matched in continuity. 7 episodes of Wrangler were shot, but only 6 aired. The last one ran on September 15th, 1960, not a moment too soon, for NBC, KTLA, Ford, Silva, and Shulk. Now remember, last week when we talked about Encounter in Elephant Butte, in its very, very unfinished and not ready for prime time condition in the archive, and yet explained why, even if it was swapped out for another episode at the last minute, TV Guide and local newspaper TV listings pullouts across the country would already have gone to press with the logline and cast information for Elephant Butte. One thing that John and Rod did report to us from watching A Crisis Named Wavelin is that it was completely edited, scored, and had opening titles and credits. And it had a fourth-wall-breaking promo at the end in which Jason Evers steps out of character, he's Jason Evers now, not Pitcairn, and ceremonially hands the time slot back to Tennessee Ernie Ford. So bearing in mind the information about how much of a beast Wrangler was to produce with the videotape technology of the time, allow me to finish presenting to you my theory from last week's show. Encounter at Elephant Butte was probably never broadcast. The information sent out well in advance by NBC was dutifully printed in TV Guide and other places, and thus the cast of that episode was recorded for posterity for someone to input into IMDb. But I don't think anyone ever actually saw Encounter at Elephant Butte. What they saw was A Crisis Named Wavelin. The unfinished Elephant Butte workprint videotape languished in KTLA's archives until donated to the UCLA Library's media department, and the only members of the public to lay eye on it, so far as we know, have been one Gene Roddenberry and one John Champion in 2024. And, of course, anyone making arrangements to see it after listening to us ramble on and on about Wrangler on this podcast, and Ashley, I believe that's about to include you.
Yeah, it sure is. Me and Mission Log Prodigy's own Charlene Schmidt are going to go do that here in about 11 days. At the time of recording. By the time this airs, we will have done it for about like a week. At that point, it will have already been done. But yes, Char and I are going to take a little field trip together out to UCLA. And we're going to watch all the Wrangler episodes. We're going to take some notes and come back and talk about it here on the show. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. I think that's going to be a good time.
Yes, I am excited to pick your brains about this because for all the research and all the talking I've done about this show, I haven't seen it, which is ironic. But anyway, thanks to the memories of Joel Tater, and we will post a link to the page this appears on, eyesofageneration.com, for you to read yourself and to see that really interesting photo of the location filming. We can kind of piece together what happened here. 7 episodes shot, 6 aired, and I feel like this lends a lot of weight to our earlier theory that we arrived at, that Gene Roddenberry had no idea or intention for Wrangler to break new ground in a technological sense by shooting on video. It was a decision made at KTLA and at NBC and at Paramount. Oh, always with Gene and NBC and Paramount, isn't it? And this decision was thrust upon Gene's creation, saddling it with production requirements that overtook it and made it a lot harder to produce. While these innovations were meant to make it cheaper and easier to make Wrangler, the technology was not yet mature enough for either of those to be the case. And so after this episode, that was a wrap for Wrangler. Originally intended for an 8-week run, it barely augured in for a landing with 6 aired episodes and 1 left on the cutting room floor. Because all the technical firsts heaped onto the show cut its on-air life short. Come to think of it, this probably shortened Tennessee Ernie Ford's vacation by a week, if you think about it.
Ooh, yeah. Nobody likes to come back a week early from vacation.
Yeah, so when you look at all of these factors, and when you look back at the hit or miss scripts, and the fact that even if Elephant Butte had been completed afterward, neither 6 nor 7 episodes were enough to justify ever repeating Wrangler anywhere. We're starting to get a very clear picture, perhaps, of why Gene did not mention this show. I mean, it was an entry in his CV, but did he talk about, oh yes, this was my first creation, and it was just too much for TV at the time to handle? No, because unfortunately, thanks to both scripts which were in Gene's control and outside factors not in his control, it really wouldn't live up to that description. With 5 of the 8 completed scripts being entirely and undeniably Gene's responsibility, Gene didn't ask for any of the baggage that weighed down the first show to bear his name as its creator. With a track record that can best be summed up with Tennessee Ernie Ford had to get back on the air a week sooner than planned, and thanks to factors that Gene almost certainly had no say in, that doesn't exactly scream success at the top of its lungs. So it's easier in hindsight to see why Gene buried Pitcairn and Sam in the official record back in those days when you could stop mentioning something and that pretty much wiped it from history. Now, with all of that in mind, here is some information you cannot find on IMDb. Thanks again to John Champion for jotting all this down, because he knew this was exactly the kind of trivia he would want to talk about if he were sitting here. This week's guest stars. We have Mary Murphy as Wavelin. Spotted by a Paramount talent scout when she was only 20, Mary got her start in non-speaking roles in movies like When Worlds Collide and The Atomic City, slowly graduating to speaking parts. When TV came calling, Mary began alternating between the big and small screens, picking up guest roles on Wagon Train, The Detectives, The Tab Hunter Show, The Outer Limits, I Spy, and many others. Mary retired from showbiz in the 70s and later ran an art gallery. We lost her in 2011. We have Frank Silvera as Ahmed Ghourbaht. A veteran of westerns on both big screen and small, Frank Silvera may well be the only person of color to appear in Wrangler. At a time when not that many African Americans were getting regular work in Hollywood, Frank's skin was light enough to get him cast in numerous roles, many of them in that nebulous and, occasionally kind of icky, exotic casting category that we have mentioned in the past. Frank played characters over his career who were white, black, Latino, and, as with this episode of Wrangler, other ethnicities as well. His biggest movie roles happened in the 50s, including roles in Viva Zapata and Fear and Desire. We lost Frank in 1970. Michael Dante as Paulo. Michael was a very busy actor in the heyday of the Western, racking up appearances in multiple episodes of Colt 45, Cheyenne, The Texan, and later in the 70s, he was a regular as Crazy Horse in the series Custer, which aired on ABC. Michael later became host of a celebrity-focused radio show, which became a second career for him. There's a street named after him in his hometown of Stamford, Connecticut. Michael Dante and Gene would cross paths again. He guest starred as the treacherous Mob in the Star Trek episode Friday's Child in 1967. For the podcast, we are working from Gene's final draft script dated August 23, 1960, though that final draft was filled with pink pages indicating further revisions after August 23rd, meaning this went from final draft script to air in less than a month, if this was in fact the episode that aired. So while Gene may not have chosen the show's video workflow, that video workflow definitely affected him, because that kind of time crunch indicates a mindset of, hey, it's video, we don't have to send film to the lab. Of course we can make a whole show in under a month.
Look, I just met her not 12 miles back.
3 days with the woman I was to marry.
I would not marry a puppy dog like you.
Now hold on. 3 days ago I was in Carson City.
Silence! He speaks the truth. He did not steal me.
Well, now thank you, ma'am.
I went with him of my own will. 3 days ago in Carson City, we were married.
Wavelin!
You swear it? As a daughter of a Turk? As a member of the High Church?
I swore I would not marry him.
And I swear your daughter's the darndest liar I have ever met of mine.
You see, already he wishes to leave me. He grows tired of me. Writes to leave me at my father's home.
You marry a stranger, Wavelin? When you and I, for so many years, were promised?
He is a man. I knew this was the one when I first saw him.
Which was exactly 3 hours ago.
Silence!
Pitcairn is an American cowboy who rides the late 1800s western frontier, helping people in need. With a carbine in his saddle boot, Pitcairn and his horse Sam look for work and adventure in the Wild West. Prologue. Wrangler's Log, October 3rd, 1869. Pitcairn is weaving his way through sheep herds 40 miles southwest of Carson City, Nevada, and he does not plan on making any stops as he muses about this area being full of strange folks, strange languages, and even stranger ways. Speaking of which, a young woman is sitting by the side of the trail, apparently oblivious to Pitcairn and Sam approaching. Pitcairn asks her if she's in need of help, but she doesn't answer, and Pitcairn decides that's his signal to keep moving. But as Sam trots off, the young lady whistles loudly. She examines both horse and rider and then says, "I like you. I will ride with you." And without even waiting for an invitation or an affirmative, she's right behind Pitcairn on the saddle, holding on to him rather tightly. Well, I do declare. She asks to be taken back to her father's place about 12 miles from here and spills a few other details too. She ran away from home to escape an arranged marriage. Hey, maybe her dad will think Pitcairn's the guy. This is already getting a little too complicated for Pitcairn, who kindly offers to let her take a 12-mile walk to think it through. But she says she won't let her father kill him. Thanks a lot, Pitcairn says, and gets Sam moving again. Act 1. They arrive at the sheep farm owned by Ahmed Ghourbaht, who watches as they approach. Pitcairn has to help his rider dismount, which she does by leaping off of Sam's back, grabbing Pitcairn, and knocking them both off balance to the ground. Right about then, a gunshot hits the ground next to them. Meet Mr. Ghourbaht in his 50s and toting a rifle. He's being very protective of Pitcairn's passenger, Mr. Ghourbaht's 19-year-old daughter, Wavelin. She tells Pitcairn to act like she's an old friend, and then pleads Pitcairn's case to her father. Nothing dishonorable has happened here. Ghourbaht's still spitting mad at Pitcairn, though, pointing a rifle at his face at point-blank range. Ghourbaht is followed closely by a younger man, Paulo, and other ranch hands, all of them European immigrants of one kind or another, gathering to see what's happening. And what's happening is Ghourbaht not buying that this stranger didn't make off with his daughter for 3 days. Oh, and by the way, his daughter was promised to marry Paulo. Pitcairn protests that he just met Wavelin 12 miles back that-a-way, and 3 days ago he was in Carson City. That's right, Wavelin says, Carson City. That's where I married Mr. Pitcairn, who was a real man and not a puppy dog like Paulo. Pitcairn is her husband now. She loves him. And all of this is a huge surprise to Pitcairn, but at least he's not having a weapon pointed directly at his face anymore. Ghourbaht tells Pitcairn he will live in Ghourbaht's house as a son. When Pitcairn protests, he's staring down the barrel of a rifle again. Apparently, these people take the whole till death do us part thing really seriously. Pitcairn asks if Paulo wanted to marry Wavelin. Why didn't he? Paulo just laments that he can't marry her until she becomes a widow. Yeah, maybe work on the phrasing there. This is becoming a very literal shotgun wedding. And as if Paulo hasn't been emasculated enough, he's given the task of escorting Pitcairn to Wavelin's room. While Wavelin runs down a list of reasons Pitcairn should be happy to be married to her, he's not happy. Pitcairn peeks into a closet to make sure they're alone, and then proceeds to put Wavelin over his knee for a spanking, each whack a reason Wavelin shouldn't be too happy to be with him. Paulo bursts in the door at the sound of Wavelin's protest, but she dismisses him again, and he leaves, closing the door behind him. Pitcairn then shoves Wavelin in the closet and locks her in, going to the window of her room to make his escape, but one of Ghourbaht's ranch hands is waiting outside, armed. Welcome to the family. Act 2. Pitcairn wakes up from a nap and finds Ghourbaht and Paulo in the living room. Paulo, seething, leaves at the sight of Pitcairn. After discovering that it's no use trying to convince Ghourbaht the truth of what's happened, Pitcairn listens to the man talk about his daughter, brought up among men in a country of men, after her mother died. Ghourbaht boasts that she is wild and strong like a man. Pitcairn mumbles that he's met bobcats with better manners. Ghourbaht continues dispensing wisdom from the old country. A woman is like a horse of the finest spirit. You either tame it completely or it remains wild. But the more Ghourbaht keeps talking, the more the contradictions pile up. He also thinks a woman should prepare a man's meal and stand at his side, serving him while he eats. But he laments Wavelin will never be like that. She was born in this country and has, as he puts it, tasted this freedom. He apologizes to Pitcairn if Wavelin is not ready for marriage. But that's okay, Pitcairn says. In fact, he says Ghourbaht may have come up with the answer he needs, asking if Ghourbaht would back him up if he demanded Wavelin fulfill the more traditional woman's role from the old country. Ghourbaht shrugs. It cannot be done. But Pitcairn is thinking it can at least be attempted, and the attempt might make Wavelin rethink the story she has cooked up about marrying Pitcairn. Ghourbaht offers one piece of kind of alarming advice. I give a proverb which made my own marriage successful. Small bruises are permissible on a wife, but no blood. After that conversation, Pitcairn lets Wavelin out of the closet, and she is spitting mad. Probably needs a bathroom break, too. But no time for that now. It's time for dinner, which Pitcairn expects his new bride to cook. Wavelin tries to order Paulo to do the kitchen duties, but Pitcairn countermands that order. His wife will do her own cooking. Ghourbaht and Paulo exchange a glance, but say nothing. Lamb and onion stew sounds good to Pitcairn. And with the 19th century equivalent of make me a sandwich ringing in her ears, Wavelin gets to work. She is not smiling about it. Even when she serves dinner, the indignity doesn't stop there. She moves to sit at the table with Pitcairn, Paulo, and Ghourbaht, but Pitcairn pulls the chair out from under her and she lands on the floor. Pitcairn demands that his blushing bride will do the serving and will not be seated, according to her family's traditional values. Actually, she's not blushing. Her cheeks are flushed with pure rage. She quietly lowers her knife to Pitcairn's side, telling him, "No man treats me like this. You think I would not kill you?" And then orders Paulo to get her a chair. Pitcairn, very much aware of the knife that could stab him at any second, simply says, "You are delaying our dinner, Mrs. Pitcairn." Ghourbaht and Paulo haven't missed what's going on either, and no one's particularly surprised when Wavelin dumps the tureen of hot stew directly over Pitcairn's head and stalks out of the room. Pitcairn simply gets up from his seat and asks Ghourbaht, "Water pump outside?" And his would-be father-in-law just nods and quietly says, "She must love you very much, otherwise it would have been the bread knife." Pitcairn and Wavelin have a private conversation in her room. He really wants to know why all of this has been dropped in his lap, and what's so bad about Paulo? Why all the lies? Pitcairn jokes, "I figured it's because I'm so all-fired handsome you couldn't resist me." Wavelin finally starts talking. "You joke about it because you do not believe it. I like that. You are not like the men here. There are handsome men here, too, good men, too, perhaps, but they make their ranches here like where they came from. That's not what Wavelin wants. She says, I was born here in this country. I am an American. Is it wrong to be proud of this? In this country, a person can rise to any position they have the courage to wish for and the strength to hold." So, what was so bad about Paulo? Wavelin explains, "Does he have courage? Does he have strength? Did he ride after me? When I looked up and saw you this morning, Pitcairn, I saw the thing I have read about in books. Strength, defiance, a man who says, I am myself a king, there is no man over me. This is why I ran away with the other man." Pitcairn gently points out, America is built on words like we, together, the common good, for the people, and it doesn't have kings or queens. When Wavelin starts talking about what she would do for a man she truly loves, Pitcairn cuts her off. That's the first time he's heard anyone other than Paulo use that word. What books are these that she's getting these notions from? Wavelin goes to pull them down from a shelf in the closet, and Pitcairn locks her in there, again, and goes to sleep. Act 3. In the morning, Pitcairn heads out to the living room to chat with the other men. He starts dropping hints that he finds Wavelin disappointing as a wife. He keeps dropping these hints, and they keep getting uglier until Paulo is fighting mad. Paulo thinks a woman like Wavelin is wasted on a pig like Pitcairn. Pitcairn hands Paulo the key to the closet and tells him, "Oh, you might want to go let Wavelin out of the closet." Everyone's astonished. "You locked her in a closet?" After freeing her, Paulo walks back into the living room and belts Pitcairn and keeps beating him up. Pitcairn puts up a bit of a fight, but basically he is playing to lose. Even he is surprised when Wavelin smashes a chair over his head. And then the truth finally comes out. Nobody married anybody in Carson City, and at no point has Pitcairn taken advantage of Wavelin. Locked her in a closet a couple of times and spanked her, sure, but nothing that brings dishonor upon Ghourbaht's house. Paulo is free to ask for her hand in marriage. The next day, the wedding ceremony is in full swing, and Pitcairn is getting Sam ready to hit the trail again. Ghourbaht emerges and invites Pitcairn to stay. They'll be eating and drinking for days still. Pitcairn turns around and reveals the black eye he got from Paulo. Or maybe it was Wavelin. Seems like everyone's had a go at him. He quotes, or maybe invents, an old Turkish proverb. "Love is great for lovers, but mighty painful for him who plays Cupid." The end.
Earl, I can safely say that you took the recap, and you did right by the recap. And I was going to try to make a joke about going to Carson City for a shotgun wedding, but I don't know that Carson City was the Vegas of Nevada at that point, and probably was not filled with drive-through wedding chapels where you could get married by Elvis. So,
Yeah, wrong century. Those people didn't know what they were missing.
no, they did not.
But what they were missing were lines like this, where Pitcairn says, "All right, Sam." Yeah, he says this when Wavelin is non-responsive to him. Pitcairn says, "All right, Sam, last one to force myself on a lady." I can't tell if I like this or not. There's a lot of lines in this I don't like.
Is this another one of those situations like what we had with Hotel de Paris, where Sundance says, "I hooked up with her in Denver"? It doesn't mean then what it does now.
Oh, I think this phrase means the same thing across the decades. It implied something more than Pitcairn asking her if she needs help. And yet, it also makes me think of that meme that was all over the place a couple of years back, where there's this young guy apparently shouting directly into the ear of a young lady who doesn't look like she could possibly give less of a crap what he is saying. And I've seen all sorts of text applied to that meme. Usually tone-deaf fandom takes on things. So, let me admit to some awareness that there is more than one way to jam yourself into someone else's life, and that's not welcome either. So, I kind of want to like this line, while also being faintly worried that I shouldn't. But Pitcairn is at least showing enough self-awareness that, I'm not wanted here. I am going to move on. It's like, yes, please, and wish you could have done the same for Susan Oliver at the Bar M when she was bathing, dude.
Take a walk. Go away. Not funny.
At the same time, I do appreciate Pitcairn stopping to ask her if she's in trouble. I don't know how this would be handled if it was someone being non-responsive in a relatively public space today, but it would probably be someone getting the cops called on them.
Right.
And so I do like Pitcairn being aware enough that maybe he's not wanted and he can move on without sticking around and making snarky comments, and I do declare. I also like him having an awareness of the concept of having a duty of care.
Yeah. It was kind of him to check in and say, "Hey, are you all right?" Because, back then it's probably not going to be that common for a young woman to be wandering around in the middle of nowhere by herself.
Yeah. And if she is not even responding to simple questions, that's, it's kind of a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That something is wrong somewhere.
Right.
That's all in the teaser. Now, everything I have to say about Act 2 onward will be said in discussions. I'm going to try my hardest not to make it another rant and shout it into everyone's ears like that guy in that meme.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be difficult not to rant.
Well, Earl, I will pray that you do rant because I love a good Earl rant because it's fun to watch you get excited and worked up about something, but also you always have something good to say. So I'm really looking forward to said Earl rant. I will provide the soapbox. I think for me, something that you mentioned to me before we recorded was like, wow, this is like Helen of Abidjanian cranked up to 150%, which you and Norm covered that. That was the episode prior to me joining the show.
Yeah, an award-winning episode, no less.
Right.
The script won an award.
Did it really? Okay, cool.
Yes.
I'd forgotten that bit. So this morning, I went back and watched that episode of Have Gun Will Travel. And I'm like, oh, wow, there was a lot of copy-paste here. We can dig into this more during discussion, but I can't decide which one does this better. There's still problems with both. I don't know. We'll talk about it a little more then, but I just want to point it out, folks. If you have not gotten to watch that particular episode of Have Gun, or if you haven't listened to that episode of our show, please go back and listen to it because you're going to get like an interesting side-by-side comparing those two episodes.
Yeah, and we're again at this point where it's kind of like, okay, is Pitcairn being fed a solid diet of Paladin's leftovers?
It is a summer replacement series. Summer reruns are a thing. I think he's maybe taking it a little literally here. Yeah. But I will say, though, for the similarities, it's still not totally the same story.
Oh yes, there is a big fork in the road, and again, a lot of that's going to come up in discussion because this script gets into areas, making funnies about things that I don't think you can really make fun of.
I really like Wavelin's spunk. I like that she's assertive. I really like that she is not afraid to speak her mind. There's some interesting, ways they've phrased this in the script. She was raised like a man, okay? Because apparently women can't have opinions or whatever. And if they do, they've somehow been raised like a man. I don't think that was the case for me, and yet I have a lot of people who are afraid to push back on me because I'm loud and opinionated, which I don't mind. People are allowed to disagree with me. I have no, ego about that. I have an ego about a lot of other things, but that's not one of them, I thought that was kind of interesting, but we can talk more about that in discussion because I feel like it's all going to come together there, so... But felt important.
It's all part of the stew, and we will get that stew upended over our heads.
Yep. That's one way to put it.
Because I certainly feel that way reading the script at points. Yeah, I love Wavelin. She is my favorite character in this thing. Mm-hmm. I understand what Pitcairn is trying to accomplish in this script, but his tactics become very questionable.
Yes. Lots of questionable tactics. I will
putting
say
it nicely.
Yeah. I will say, Earl, this is the most I think that we've seen since episode of Bar M. Oh, Pitcairn, you're looking so makey-outy tonight. And but then it's also, Wavelin, you are looking so makey-outy tonight. Even though I don't actually want to marry you, I'm still going to, knock on the door with my shirt off. I'm going to give you a big old smooch. And then lots of interesting stuff. So, again, we'll dive into more of that in discussion.
The big fight between Pitcairn and Paulo in Act 3. I have a queasy feeling. Now, you're going to get to see this for yourself. So, I have a queasy feeling that the fight in Act 3 is played out with a comedy music score like the bar fight from The Trouble with Tribbles. It probably lasts about as long on screen, judging from the script, because the script is the fight just goes on. In other words, music that says, there's no tension, nothing really bad is going to happen here. This is a funny fight. I'm not sure how funny I'd feel if I got a chair broken over my head, but, that's why I don't wrestle.
Well, last episode, Pitcairn took a whip to a chair and splintered it nearly in two. So I'm like, dang, how hard did he hit it with that whip? And how brittle was that chair?
He's like, hey, I heard how hard that other guy is on barroom furniture. I've got it in for all furniture.
All furniture must die.
Sofa, you're going down. Okay, Ashley, we've got kind of a screwball comedy setup here. We have memorable characters. I mean, we've already sung Wavelin's praises. And then this script lands, and it is full of terrible lines.
Yeah.
Ghourbaht's line here is alarming, to say the least. I give a proverb which made my own marriage successful. Small bruises are permissible on a wife, but no blood. Okay, Ghourbaht, how successful a marriage was that?
Vomit.
Yeah, none of that's permissible. And I'm not even going to give this a free pass when it's attributed to someone from another culture. This was in 1960 viewed as a permissible attitude. Whether it was claimed to be the belief of the stereotypical old country or not is very much in line with 1960 America. And since we live in exhausting times here in 2025, I will confess, maybe this is a mercy to you, dear listeners, I haven't quite refilled my rant tank from last time. So let me just calmly tell you, no bruises are permissible. Not on a spouse, not on a child. Don't hit people who are not harming you. And no, questioning your male primacy in the pecking order is not harm. Why do I even have to say this stuff in the 21st century? Also, we let Wavelin out of the closet, and she has not eaten in 2 days? How long was she in that closet? They noticed her being missing for 3 days. Did no one notice her being missing for 2? So we're getting into something that's not only alarming, borderline offensive, that just doesn't really make plot sense.
Yeah.
What I really want to talk about, though, is Paulo. Let's talk about Paulo. We don't talk about Bruno, but I am going to talk about Paulo.
Let's talk about Paulo, Earl. Tell me about Paulo.
He doesn't get much to say or do in this script other than just being constantly emasculated by Wavelin, and to some extent by everyone else, too. I really feel for Paulo. I feel the need to stick up for Paulo. But for me to explain that takes me into some soul-bearing here, so everyone buckle up. I used to be married. I had 2 wonderful kids. At the time the first kid was coming along, my then-wife and I took stock of the situation. She was a federal employee. She had amazing insurance and union-backed job security. Her insurance meant we wouldn't have to pay a dime to bring a kid into the world. Wow. I, on the other hand, was working at a TV station owned by a national chain of stations, and I was routinely putting in 10 and 16-hour days because we were constantly short-staffed, and I was having to do a fair amount of picking up the slack for other people I worked with. My insurance was negligible, if you could even say it existed. It was better than having no insurance, but only on paper. So it was kind of obvious I was going to quit TV, be a stay-at-home dad, be a house husband with a bunch of house cats, and also, by a massive coincidence that could easily be interpreted as the universe trying to tell you something, I had recently acquired my own video production gear that I had at home, so I could still try to do things that would bring in a buck. Suddenly being a stay-at-home parent was daunting. I was not looking at this as, my impending vacation. I had no idea what to do with a baby. I had no idea anything about parenting because I was kind of left to grow up feral at a certain unfortunate, far too early point myself. So it's not like I had this huge mental notebook of great parenting moments because I hadn't experienced those. The good news is I was already a homebody, although maybe I overdo that a bit now. But I have always had a hard time understanding people who work their butts off to have a nice home and then spend very little time there. It's like, oh no, I'm paying for this place. I am staying here as much as possible. This turned out to be the greatest thing. I loved being stay-at-home dad. It broke me out of the homebody thing a bit because kids love to go places, especially once they're moving around on their own and, they want to go to the park or whatever. Even before that, they're portable and you have to take them places. Go to the store, pick up baby formula, pick up diapers, get some groceries, pick up the mail, all with your little buddy in tow. That was great. I loved that. You sing little songs you just made up and make funny faces at him in public. You don't care if anyone's watching. At least this was my stay-at-home dad experience, and you cannot put a price on that kind of bonding time. And then I noticed people talking to me like I was on vacation. I was not on vacation. Babies are exhausting. You got to feed a bottle every 3 hours. 8 hours of sleep, kiss that goodbye for years. Your entire day is a series of unsatisfying naps. You become a battery that is never fully charged again. And let me also state that the same is true for women who stay home with their babies. I'm not saying this is a uniquely male experience at all. And you do all this stuff to keep this little human being alive. We would not have been able to afford to pay anyone to do that. And so, between that and my crap pay and my crap hours and my crap benefits, we made the mutual decision I was staying home with the baby. But this was in a red state. If you were a guy going everywhere with a baby during the day, which obviously meant you don't have a job, people looked at you funny. People behind you in the checkout. People working the checkout. Don't you have a job? Why are you with the baby? Isn't that mom's job? Worse yet, members of her family started in with that too. Oh, he's not working. You're financially carrying him. He should go out and get a job to bring in the money to put the kid in a daycare where total strangers can take care of him. This just wasn't how they did things. And since it was a way of doing things alien to them, it was wrong. End of discussion. And keep in mind, in and around this, I was also cooking and cleaning and doing laundry, doing dishes, and occasionally I'd fall asleep and someone would have to remind me that the lawn needs mowing too. Also did that. Now, for someone who wasn't working, I was working harder than I'd ever had to work in my entire life, before or since. But that wasn't enough. And that became a loose thread that everyone kept tugging on until it unraveled the whole marriage. In full disclosure, my own reactions to people doing that were probably not helpful either. They were not as constructive as they could have been. Everyone gets some blame for the situation, including me. Now, I bring all that up because another thing that I encountered in my marriage was a very well-known book about 5 love languages. Well, it used to be 5. It was 5 when I read it. By now, it may be 127 love languages, and one of them may be eating shredded cheese right out of the bag and watching Doctor Who reruns with your significant other, which, honestly, that sounds great.
Hey!
But what I do remember about that book is that one of the love languages was acts of service, which means you do things for your partner. This is where I think we find Paulo. Why is everyone treating him as if this makes him less of a man? Does every man in this country, in this culture, have to be the breadwinner? Does every man have to pound his chest and sound the horn for male primacy? Is being a caregiver, or hell, just someone who dotes on your partner, is this some kind of betrayal of the masculine identity? And especially, may all available gods help you if you are a non-neurotypical man. Is it all right with society if not all of us are John Wayne or Don Draper? Will the entire culture collapse if we laugh off the implied importance of putting a Greek letter ahead of the word male and acting like that means something when it's just astrology for men who are insecure in their own skin? Are we not allowed to move away from leaving bruises being the defining trait of masculinity? And I'm not really expecting anyone to have an answer to these questions. I just want everyone to think about that. And the problem is, Wavelin has been indoctrinated into this line of thinking as well. Because she's treating Paulo, she's the chief person treating Paulo like he's less of a man. When it turns out, no, he is exactly the man she needs. Because what makes a successful partnership, and granted, I'm wandering into unmarried marriage counselor territory here, is that you have strengths that make up for your partner's weaknesses, and you complement each other, and it just kind of fits together like a puzzle piece, and it works. Somehow, it works. So we have two problems here. Paulo is not being allowed to be who he is, and I kind of worry about whatever this marriage is going to be, because it seems like Wavelin needs to make this adjustment as well, this mental adjustment. But also, all of the misogynistic, abusive language in this was awful.
Yeah.
I didn't like this one at all. And it started out so funny. This whole scene about, I just met her 12 miles back that way. I was laughing out loud reading that.
Yeah.
And then it just kept getting worse. That's all I had to say until the wrap. That's the whole rant. I realize that may not have been as loud as the last one, but it is something I think we all need to think about.
Yeah.
Because the masculinity script that Norm drew our attention to very early in the life of this podcast is still being deployed. It is still outmoded. It was already outmoded. It's still not doing anyone any favors, and it's doing more harm than good.
I think what I have to say in response to that is go off, King, because that was awesome. Love a good Earl rant. And I've read that 5 Love Languages book. I find it helpful. I love to learn, I'm not super geeky about it, but I think it's interesting to find out what's your Myers-Briggs, what's your Enneagram number, what are your love languages? Because I don't know. I feel very strongly that you should try to connect with people where they're at.
Yes.
I try to understand how people work because, again, I'm a bit neurospicy too, and I'm not always great at perceiving or picking up on social cues. I'm loud and awkward. Sorry. That's just... I can fix one of the two things maybe a little bit, but not all of it. So I love learning those things about people because it helps me understand them a little bit better. And so I can interact better. So talking about acts of service, I'm a dead tie for my number one between physical touch and words of affirmation. So if you hug me and tell me I'm pretty happy about that. But
okay, good to know.
Yeah. But my number 2 is acts of service. And that one used to be lower down my list. After I got married, that was I would rocketed it up because life is hard. And if you have a partner who walks beside you, not behind you, that makes such a difference in how you interact with each other, your stress level or whatever. And so Mr. Nutty Blogger is amazing. He's always doing stuff around the house. If I need help with something, all I have to say, hey, honey, can you come help me with this? Because he's neurospicy too. So we're both fairly frequently. And so we've learned how to work well together and to get stuff done, because otherwise we're both just off in space somewhere. He's very cognizant that this is a way that makes me feel loved. And so I am so grateful that he's aware of that, and it's very helpful. It's good. It was a helpful thing for our marriage. So there's that. But he also grew up with a dad his dad worked outside the home. But his dad, my father-in-law, is one of the best men that I've ever met in my life. Abundantly kind. My brother-in-law is special needs. He's a traumatic brain injury and has short-term memory loss as a result of that. And so watching him be a good dad to not only my husband, but my brother-in-law, and being a good husband, good partner to my mother-in-law, it's my father-in-law is one of the best men on the planet. And I'm so grateful to have him in my life because he taught my husband how to be a good man through his acts of service, the way that he cares for his family, and he's diligent and selfless, and I love him for it because he taught my husband how to do that. And so when I read all of that to say, I read Paulo, and I was like, Paulo is awesome. Why is everybody kicking Paulo in the balls? Y'all cut it out.
Yeah, and why does no one respect him until, he does the obvious Western masculine thing of starting a brawl?
Listen.
It's like he's not even a blip on anyone's radar until that happens.
In my house, if anybody's starting a brawl, it ain't Mr. Nerdy Blogger. It's going to be me. But gosh, why? It's so frustrating. And then, I've said it on the show before, Earl. There was a meme that circulated a little while back. What if we told every girl who's been called bossy instead that she had leadership skills? We don't tell boys that they're bossy. That's encouraged. Like, oh, you're a good leader.
I feel like Wavelin should meet Mrs. Browning and they could run a ranch together and it's like they would be unstoppable.
Oh, hell yeah. They could power a small town.
Yeah, and so we do have Gene writing amazing, strong women here in 1960.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, he is writing men around them who are treating them like crap.
This whole concept that keeps resurfacing in this of strong women need to be broken.
Yeah, like a horse. It's like...
Stop it.
Yeah,
we ain't playing no Genuine song right now. So, it's not what we talking about. So frustrating that every time, wow, we see this really cool woman who's independent and assertive and isn't afraid to speak her mind. And then we get, she needs breaking. Let me turn you over my knee. We pop you on the butt 6 or 7 times and see if you'll behave now. Oh my gosh. Stop it.
Yeah.
Ugh. Ugly.
Yeah, and I think that really, not to jump straight to the rap, I really feel like that's where I land on this one. There was so much promise here, and then it got inexcusably ugly.
Yeah. When she dumps the tureen of soup, it's I love soup. Soup is I could eat soup every day for the rest of my life, and I would be completely happy with that.
Just break the chair over his head.
Yeah, break
Save
the chair.
The soup.
You're wasting the soup. Stop it. No soup for you.
Presumably, because they're talking about a leg of lamb, presumably there's a bone somewhere on a plate.
I say, yeah,
in the middle of that table. It's just whack.
Yeah, he got conked Fred Flintstone style or something like that. Jeez.
Yeah, save the soup.
But I'm also that's gonna be hot. Are you burned, Pitcairn? A little concerned for your well-being here versus guess I better go wash up.
I understand that he is putting himself through no small amount of inconvenience and perhaps physical pain to try to bring the right people together in this situation. It's just that all the words that are said in the course of doing that are disturbing.
Yeah.
And I realize they're very, very 1960. They may well be very 1869. I'm not sure. I don't think I would have liked being around in either of those points in time because the words matter. Well, Ashley, the honeymoon's over on this one.
Oh man, yeah, that was a very short honeymoon, Earl.
Yeah, 1 hour and we're done. Jeez. I really wanted to like this one when it was shaping up to be a screwball romantic comedy. That scene where Pitcairn finds out at the same time as everyone else that apparently he just got married, that's comedy gold. That's hilarious.
Oh, mm-hmm.
The blatant misogyny and abuse of language in the rest of the story, not hilarious at all. I am capable of carving out the exception that, oh yes, this reflects the normative values of the past. But all that tells me now is the past was awful for anyone who wasn't a heterosexual Christian white man. And when the past is trying to revert to the ways of the past, like we seem to be trying to do now, I can't let the past off the hook. I can't let the show off the hook. A Crisis Named Wavelin has a promising start because it, like you said, it feels like it's going to be Helen of Abishanian dialed up to about a 15.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets really ugly. I get what Pitcairn is trying to do. I know we both like soup. Hey, I still cheered for him getting a whole pot of stew poured over him.
Oh, yeah. No, he needed that.
And then getting the crap beaten out of him. I'm kind of hoping that I am wrong about Elephant Butte because I'm not sure anyone really needed to see this episode hit air. The very short distance between final draft and air date, even if you're shooting on video and don't need to send film to the lab, feels like it was a bit of a rush job. I'd like to think that some of this story's glaring problems could have been solved if there was enough time for another set of eyeballs to land on this script and say, wow, Gene, are we sure we want to say this? So, A Crisis Named Wavelin is in the running for the least Roddenberry script I have seen yet out of Gene Roddenberry. And yet at the same time, I know Elan of Troyes is still going to get made a few years after this and broadcast in the last season of Star Trek. A whole decade after this episode of Wrangler. And although that episode is not written directly by Gene, you also have Captain Kirk talking about putting someone over his knee. Yeah, kind of like Pitcairn does here. So unfortunately, how poorly Wavelin is treated stretches into the 23rd century. The 60s weren't that great if you weren't a man. That's my takeaway from this episode. I'm sure that's not the message that was intended. I'm sure it was just intended to be funny. But there's stuff here you just cannot joke about. Help me out here, Ashley.
Earl, yes and amen to all of that. I've already expressed my frustration that there seems to be a running theme in this series that strong women are made to be broken. Sadly, that persists in a lot of areas even today. Anytime we have a female lead of any color, it's woke. Because, God help us, women can't lead. No. Basically, anything, even in our entertainment, let's set aside, we're not talking about people's actual, careers or anything like that. Anything where women might have a little bit of their own agency is written off as, oh, this can't be good because this is a DEI story. Or this is woke garbage or whatever. I'm over it. I've been over it for my whole life because as a woman who has opinions and isn't afraid to say them, I got told to sit down and hush quite a bit. And I don't like that. Or I could have those, but I had to defer to whichever man was in charge. Or I could express concerns, but they wouldn't necessarily be considered or whatever. Or that's not ladylike, Ashley. You need to sit down and be quiet. I really empathize with Wavelin here because she's trying to have some agency in her own life. Pretty much every man in this script, with the exception of Paulo, doesn't think that she should. And then poor Paulo, who is the kind man in here, the emotionally sensitive guy, he gets emasculated the whole time. And isn't given any respect until he throws a punch. And
yeah, it kind of goes back to Cunningham's oh, you just showed me you're a man. How did Cunningham want to be shown that his son was a man? Mm-hmm. He wanted to see his son kill somebody.
No. It's beyond frustrating that not only are we still dealing with this now? I mean, art is important because art reflects, it does one thing. It reflects what is currently happening, or it's aspirational, what could be happening. And those of us who love Star Trek know that, the goal of Star Trek is aspirational.
Yes.
How could things be if we did something differently? Nothing about this is aspirational. Yeah, maybe he's under the gun. Maybe, we've got to, crank something out. Well, let's copy paste Helen of Abidjanian and change a few things. Because we got to, put this episode to bed. All right. Thank God for people like DC Fontana who broke through. Because I doubt, very seriously, there were any women in the building Gene could have had, look at this script and say, hey, what do you think? Because you're right, Earl. This is the least Gene script that we've ever gened on Gene-ology. I wish he had gotten a woman to look at this and say, this is a terrible idea. Please stop.
Yeah. It's such a promising start, and to see it descend into what it descends into is disheartening. That's the kindest way I could put it. It's disheartening.
Yeah.
Because as you pointed out, there is nothing aspirational about this.
None.
This is just like, the values of 1869 or 1960, they're fine.
No biggie.
They're great. I'm a guy. That's why they're great, and so I'm going to write about it.
My only hope is that, we already know at least one of the scripts that we've covered, according to John and Eugene, by the time it made it to air, was actually quite different from the script that we actually had at the incident at the Wide Loop. My hope is that somewhere between script and what may or may not have made it to air, or at least got recorded, my hope is that we have some improvement on what we've been given here in the script.
I at the same time, the actors have to follow the script, but hopefully, maybe someone at the editing stage saw some of this and thought better of it.
Yeah. Can we save this in the edit?
Yeah, because that factoid about, the pilot not being delivered to the network, so the network hadn't even seen it until hours before it aired. Well, networks then, and, to a lesser extent now, had standards and practices departments. And I know for a fact that NBC standards and practices, became the bane of Gene's existence during Star Trek. I wonder where they were in 1960 to look at this, unless, of course, everything was happening so late in the day that they didn't get to see it until it hit air, and then they were like, oh, maybe we need to bring Tennessee Ernie Ford home for vacation a lot sooner. Except that handover apparently was on tape, where Jason Evers hands over to Tennessee Ernie Ford. So it was already known that was going to happen. But yeah, if this was what this show was going to be, I don't blame them for not giving it its full 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Pretty sad if you don't measure up to the full 8 weeks, but this script definitely does not.
Does not.
Special thanks to the Roddenberry Repertory Players. Our cast this week featured Cody Banning as Pitcairn, Kendra Bolen as Wavelin, Daniel Hackman as Paulo, and Shane Sexton as Ghourbaht. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at MissionLogPod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
On the next Gene-ology, the incident of the magic elixir. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.